going on, RotoGrinders? Dean here at Dean78904. If you want to get all technical on me, it is 3 o'clock on the East Coast, 12 o'clock on the West Coast. But of course, that means it's time for Yahoo DFS Live, presented by RotoGrinders. Joining me once again, as always, we merge the season-long people with the DFS weekly people here at RotoGrinders. And, two of the best here as far as Yahoo has to offer. Leading off is Dalton Del Don, a very excited Dalton. Because, Dalton, you had a future bet on the Houston Astros. Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, back in March, I was in Las Vegas, and I threw a decent amount of money on the Astros to win the World Series at 15-1. I'm a San Francisco Giants fan, so this was doubly going against the Dodgers. I was really I was pessimistic entering Game 7. On the road, they have not been hitting as well outside of Houston, but what a game! Anticlimactic. The series was one of the best I've ever seen, and I thought it was going to have a lot of drama, but 5-0 after 2 innings. I'm extremely happy with the outcome. So next time I see you guys, lunch is on me.
Very nice. Yeah, I was with you as well as far as Houston, and I was happy to see them win. And I was pessimistic as well. I thought their best chance was Game 6 with Verlander. Once I saw him blow that, I was like, well, it's going to go the Dodgers' way.
Yeah.
And they have Kershaw lurking in the bullpen. Obviously, it was great, but didn't really account for Darvish to get smashed for 5 runs or so. Let's bring in Liz Loza. Liz, how's Thursday treating you?
Oh, it's pretty good. And I was actively rooting against the Dodgers as someone who lives in Los Angeles and doesn't want fireworks going out and waking up my small children at 11 p.m. Not that stopped them from sleeping anyway.
I like how that's an interesting motivation that I never thought of, but that makes perfect sense. So it's perfectly reasonable. And you're not from LA, right?
No, I'm a Cubs fan. So once the Dodgers knocked off the Cubs, I was fine. Let's give it to the Astros. I don't care. Just very quiet at 11 p.m. in my neighborhood, please. We're
going to break down Week 9 in just a second. But, of course, you always look back as far as Week 8, the lineups we rolled out there. The RotoGrinders team, the Yahoo team, we all put out our own personal lineups. And, Dalton, let's talk about yours first. Tell us some of the things you hit on, some of the things you may not have hit on so much.
Yeah, worst week I've had in a while. I told everyone on this show to pay up for Le'Veon Bell. He didn't really pay the bills. Ezekiel Elliott had a nice game, but a lot of misses here. Mark Ingram had a nice game. My sleeper, $10 baller, Marquise Goodwin, was so asleep he was catatonic. Got 0 points. Demaryius Thomas just continues to disappoint in a great matchup without Emmanuel Sanders. Kansas City secondary has been getting burnt, but the quarterback play has just been abysmal in Denver. It's been 13 or 14 games since Demaryius Thomas has scored a touchdown. He didn't come through. And my biggest disappointment is Jordan Reed. Once you buy into the guy, finally scores 2 touchdowns. Go a little bit behind the scenes. Liz has Jordan Reed in a very high stakes league we play in, and he scored his only 2 touchdowns of the year on the previous Monday night to beat me by a point or 2. So I'm like, Reed looks healthy, so I'll roll with him. And of course, he hobbles off the field immediately, scores 1 point, and he's back. Put him out to pasture, man. The human hamstring pull, Jordan Reed. So that was another one of my misses last week.
Yeah, I was on board with Reed on my Yahoo team and all across the industry, and it was disappointing to watch him kind of limp off the field. And once they throw that cue up, it's like there's no chance he's coming back. It's Jordan Reed. We know that story ends. And I guess we'll be talking about Vernon Davis as far as this week. Liz, how about your team?
Oh, I don't think we need to look past, but look towards the past. So Andy, I like the Andy Dalton, AJ Green stack a lot of places against Indianapolis, and that it didn't, pay off that well. I think for me, the ultimate disappointment, I really thought Christian McCaffrey at Tampa Bay, and I waffled of whether I was going to go with Mark Ingram or Christian McCaffrey, but I went with CMC, and that was not the greatest call. I liked Alshon Jeffrey's value. I think ultimately what really did me in, I thought Hunter Henry was going to have an awesome game against New England. No Donta Hightower, the heart of that defense. I really anticipated much more out of him as his snaps and targets had been rising over the past few weeks. And so I paid up for him, and he delivered, 2 catches on 2 targets and I think 11 total yards. So that was my major disappointment. And similarly to Dalton, I had, my $10 baller, if you will, Deontay Thompson. I'm a Bears fan, right? And so I'm a little more familiar with Thompson than most, and he had caught all 4 of his targets the week before for over 100 yards. I liked the rapport he had with Tyrod. And so I thought, okay, that Oakland secondary is totally decimated with injuries. He's going to go off. he did not. And between him and Hunter Henry, the rest of the squad just want.
Yeah, to piggyback on Andy Dalton real quickly. Cincinnati, what's up with the Bengals? I mean, life and death is double-digit favorites at home against the Colts. It takes a defensive touchdown for them to win by a point. I also hyped Joe Mixon on this show last week. It's 1.6 yards per carry, loses a fumble. Yeah, that was a great 67-yard catch and run, but he's caught from behind. He just continues to disappoint as well. That whole Bengals situation is just pretty much a disaster right now.
And AJ Green got bailed out by that touch. I think it was the same drive where Mixon got caught. I think Green got a touchdown there, so it wasn't too bad. I actually had them both in my lineup. But, yeah, you think about that one play for Mixon, and he was an absolute disaster. And Green, but he had 8 targets at least, I suppose, but 3 catches for 27 yards, kind of bailed out by a 10-yard touchdown. My $10 baller last week, and I always break the rules because whatever, I don't know. He was like $14, was Juju Smith. Schuster. So, yeah, I mean, he closed nicely for me, and I had Russell Wilson as well, too, at the quarterback. So those two definitely carried my team. But I also had Jordan Reed and his 1 catch for 5 yards, but didn't do me a ton of favors. LaShawn McCoy, I see me playing him every single week. Mark Ingram, I'm playing him every single week until those prices adjust. They've adjusted somewhat this week. We'll talk about it as far as how playable they are for week 9. And a guy I took a stand on Sunday morning was Deshaun Djax. I thought he'd have a big game, and it just did not work out for me. But, hey, bust out the Etch-a-Sketch or the Men in Black Mind Eraser. None of it happened. Now we're talking about week 9. Let's talk about guys that are willing to pay up for it. Dalton, who's the guy that you want to pay up for in week 9 on Yahoo?
Week 9, is he worth it? We'll go. I'm going to Kareem Hunt. I'm sticking with my theory that there's very few true workhorses in the NFL right now at the running back position. I said Le'Veon Bell last week. He didn't explode, but Kareem Hunt coming off the first game in which he did not get 100 yards from scrimmage during his career. But, I mean, Denver shuts down everyone. They shut down Ezekiel Elliott this season, I believe with Sean McCoy. So they still have yet to allow a rushing score, only team in the NFL to do so. So obviously the matchup is much better this week. It's the highest over-under of the week. Dallas, Kansas City, 51 points. I expect the best thing about Kansas City and Alex Smith continuing to be a fantasy guy is the fact that Kansas City, despite their win-loss record and looking like one of the better teams in the NFL, they're quietly beatable on defense, both in the secondary, and I think they've allowed the 3rd most yards per carry. So that actually helps the back and forth and not necessarily defensive battles, although Denver last week was a little different. But give me Kareem Hunt. He goes over the 100-yard mark, scores again. It's been a while since he's reached pay dirt, but I'm paying up for Kareem Hunt this week for sure.
Yeah, the weird thing with Hunt is that, start of the season, he was scoring a pile of touchdowns. Now, of late, hasn't scored a touchdown like in 5 weeks or so. It's like, too many, not enough. It's like Goldilocks. When is it going to be just right as far as touchdown expectancy? It's going to be, that's probably how he's going to close out. He is $41 on the most expensive running back on the board, so it's a little bit trickier to get him in there. We talked about McCoy is 34. Ingram, I'm sure we'll talk about at some point too, is 33. But absolutely, if you have the funds, I have no issue at all with Hunt. What are your thoughts there, Liz, as far as Kareem?
Well, I think so you're paying up for security in a situation like that. So, if that's where you want to place your security, despite the fact that he hasn't scored a touchdown in quite a few weeks, I think it makes sense. 44 is a little pricey for me, but I understand Dalton's logic completely.
How about yourself? Who you want to pay up for this week?
I'm paying up for DeAndre Hopkins because Deshaun Watson has proved to be no joke matchup proof. Watching that game against Seattle last week, I was completely blown away. And Hopkins is actually the most productive wide receiver in fantasy right now. He's got 7 scores on the season. Yeah, 3 of them came in one effort, but he's still behind just Antonio Brown in catches and yards with 45 grabs and 606 receiving yards on the season. That's an average of nearly 6.5 receptions and 87 yards per game. The Colts obviously present a nice matchup. Okay, he's going to draw Vontae Davis, but Vontae Davis has not been the Vontae Davis of old recently. He's allowing a passer rating of 109 and nearly 2 fantasy points per target. So if you're into math and you do it, in theory, Hopkins is averaging over 10 targets per game. Davis is giving up nearly 2 points per target. That could be a 20-point effort from DeAndre Hopkins. He's $33. If you don't want to spend up for that, Will Fuller, who cannot score a touchdown, is only $25. But I think that, I want some exposure to that matchup in my lineup for sure.
Yeah, Will Fuller, the new Chris Carter, all he does is score touchdowns. What is it? It's like 7 touchdowns on 13 catches, something silly like that. But certainly in play for tournaments, if nothing else. Yeah, then you mentioned Vontae Davis. Like, he's always been a guy we were kind of scared of. He was dealing with the groin earlier this year. Maybe he's just a name brand at this point. Maybe he's just Cavaricci. It's like at one point he was a thing, but he's no longer a thing. What are your thoughts there, Dalton, as far as that's the other part of it is Hopkins is only $33. He's the most expensive receiver on the board, yes, but we've paid 36, 37, 38, 39 for the other more expensive running backs, receivers on the board. So it actually is a pretty reasonable price, and obviously the matchup is absolutely silly. The only concern would be, well, what if Houston's ahead 21-0 in the middle of the second quarter after a defensive touchdown or something like that, and it's just all Lamar Miller? Dalton, thoughts on Hopkins?
Yeah, well, I'll admit last week on this very show, DeAndre Hopkins was my hard pass, a guy to avoid in Seattle, and he goes off for 224 yards and a touchdown. Just incredible what Deshaun Watson is doing. I mean, not only did he go into Seattle and first player ever, what was it, 400 yards and 50 rushing, but he did so as a rookie and making just a sixth career start ever. It's just insanely incredible. Yeah, Seattle's defense may not be as good as it once was, but they still entered last week, allowing the fewest yards per attempt in the NFL. Meanwhile, the Colts have allowed the most yards per attempt in the NFL. So it's obviously a great matchup. Certainly not going to get any pushback from me using DeAndre Hopkins. 6 touchdowns the last 4 weeks. The targets have been there. You mentioned it, Dean. I guess the one concern is if they're just blowing out the Colts and they might not have to pass a lot in the second half. But that likely means they put a bunch of points on the board in the first half. So sure, DeAndre Hopkins is the clear number 1 wide receiver this week.
Also, I just want to say to that end, I mean, that's a consideration, right? But Bill O'Brien comes from the Bill Belichick coaching tree, and it's not like Belichick has ever not stepped on the gas and embarrassed people, right? So I don't know how willing Bill O'Brien and his ego would be. He's not Mike McCarthy, right? He's not like, oh, we're just going to run now for the next half of the game.
You're saying Bill O'Brien wants to cover the spread. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, I think he has a couple of motives.
I really hope Watson's this good. Like, I don't know if he's this good, but I hope he's gonna be great. He seems like an awesome kid. He donated like his first 2 paychecks to victims of the hurricane. If you look at the backstory, like he grew up in one of those Warwick Dunn households. Like, Warwick Dunn is working with Habitat for Humanity. It's a great story. Like he was homeless and basically got free furniture. It's an awesome story. If it's worth digging into. And Watson seems like a great guy. And there's not a lot of great young quarterbacks in this league. A lot of the names are kind of old, and Andrew Luck, who knows what the deal was with him. And, hey, I hope Watson is the real deal. And I completely agree. We can absolutely pay up for Hopkins. My guys, I have 2. I think both guys are definitely in play on New Orleans. Michael Thomas and Mark Ingram. Hey, I'm back on Mark Ingram. Sure, why not? $33. He did fumble the ball twice last week, which is somewhat concerning to some extent maybe. But I've heard nothing as far as Sean Payton punishing him. We've seen before, like, he's been in the doghouse in years past. Like, we always thought, like, he just hates the guy. But it's his team right now. I know, Kamara is lurking to some extent, but he's more of the passing down guy, change of pace guy. And Michael Thomas hasn't really got loose for like the big one so far this year, but this matchup seems absolutely great. Tampa 31st DVOA against the pass, 20th DVOA against the run. This is a rebar stat, Rich Rebar. Tampa Bay has allowed a touchdown on 38.7% of their drives on the road this year. I think New Orleans just comes out and absolutely thrashes them. And there is some concern that, hey, New Orleans is ahead big. Well, okay, we'll just get the hammer and Ingram in the second half. So Michael Thomas catches the big touchdown in the first half, and Ingram is the hammer in the second half. Liz, are you on these New Orleans guys?
I would actually, over Ingram, I would prefer Alvin Kamara because of the price difference. I find Kamara, I think, is only $21, and that's incredibly cheap right now. And, the thing about Kamara is that you can use him. He's so versatile, right? Like, he's being used as a receiver out of the slot as well as a running back. They're gadgeting him. And we know that Sean Payton loves these Sproles-the-in type shiny new toys in his backfield. And now that he has one that actually works after like the CJ Spiller attempts, I feel like he's more motivated to employ him and deploy him. And I like the matchup against Tampa Bay. They've given up a score to the running back position through the air. A total of 324 yards to running backs via the air. So I think that Kamara might be like the sneakier, cheaper play.
I actually played them both on a lineup last week, and it worked out perfectly fine. I think they're both playable because there's enough to go around. And it's also worth – Ingram is not immune to catching the ball. He's not LeGarrette Blount back there. They will target him too at 6'5", 6'8" in the last 5 weeks or so. So he definitely sees plenty of targets as well. But there is a big game coming for Kamara. I agree. He's certainly worth a roster spot, if nothing else, in your tournaments. Dalton, the New Orleans studs, are you on him or what?
Yeah, I totally agree. This is a game, this week's second highest total at 51 points. The Saints, they started 0-2 and they won 5 straight. clicking on all cylinders. You mentioned it, obviously, the fumbles lost by Ingram. That's 3 in the past 3 weeks. Something of a mild concern if he puts it on the carpet right away. But last year he had a similar problem and bounced back with a huge game against the 49ers. Ever since Peterson's left, Ingram's been, a top 3 fantasy back in the passing game. 4 touchdowns over the past 3 weeks. And that's with Kamara getting a carry inside the 5 last week and him scoring as well. So they've just switched suddenly to this run first, better defense team.
You're a ball control offense. Like
Crazy.
that is
Yeah.
so fun.
And Tampa Bay, although Carolina was not able to expose them, they're ravaged in their secondary and against the run. Their defense is on its heels. Michael Thomas, I can't argue with that either. It's crazy that he's yet to reach 90 yards receiving in a game this year, but it's coming. The targets have been there. So, yeah, I would absolutely load up on all Saints this week.
Are we passing on Breeze? Breeze is $38. He's the second most expensive quarterback. And I'm great. Again, the matchup is great, but like y'all are saying, Liz, they have a legit running game. They have a 1-2 punch, and we think they're going to be ahead. Of course, they can be ahead because of 3 Breeze touchdowns in the first half. But there is some legitimate step downs that are cheaper than Breeze. So what are your thoughts?
So heading into week 8, Breeze was 13th in pass attempts. Drew Brees, 13th amongst quarterbacks in pass attempts. That to me is bananas. And he threw for under 300 yards and 0 scores against the Bears last week. Like, you have to imagine, and you look at the matchup like that, he should do more, but I don't see him clearing more than 2 scores in this game because the running game is so good. He doesn't need to. So, I think we're still in that narrative mindset of like, oh, it's the Saints. They throw a ton. They're at the Dome. It's amazing. He's going to go up, but I don't really think that that's going to happen. Like the Falcons and the Saints are not the automatic, 400-yard efforts through the air anymore.
The other part of that is that the Saints historically have a terrible defense and they're playing catch up a ton.
Right.
Now they're ahead. Like I think they'll be ahead against Tampa. At least that's what that's what Vegas is telling us. That's what logic tells us. So, Breeze, are we running away from Dalton? Does that do anything for you, or it just seems a little bit too expensive for his potential? Of course, again, tournaments absolutely in play, but for cash doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, and I worry about Tampa Bay being able to put points up against the improved defense with a quarterback situation. Either got a banged up Winston not playing well or Fitzpatrick. But having said that, one interesting thing is that Breeze's ownership might be lower than normal just because of this cold for him stretch, not putting up the elite volume as he normally does. But in general, I'm actually okay with paying up for quarterback this week, which is typically not something I advocate. But with all the buys, and then you have guys like Cam Newton playing Denver, Kirk Cousins at Seattle. Just in general this week, I'm okay with paying for the Dak Prescott, Russell Wilson, even Alex Smith. I kind of like this week as well. So I wouldn't actually fault you for going with Breeze, especially because right now we're having this conversation like, Breeze is no longer the elite guy. So maybe his ownership is lower than in typical fashion.
He doesn't have to throw a ball 50 times, basically. And Wentz is the guy playing Denver. But yeah, points still made, obviously. Newton facing Atlanta. Those are guys we want to pay up for. Dalton, let's talk about guys we don't want to pay up for necessarily. Who's one of your big fades this week?
Yeah, my bad. Yeah, Wentz is facing Denver, but he's killing it at home no matter who his opponent has been this year, admittedly. My hard pass this week is A.J. Green. We talked about the just the struggles that this offense has had in general. I know he has the reverse home splits over the past few years, but Jacksonville has allowed the fewest yards per attempt this year, just 5.7. Shut down opposing wide receivers. So at that price, I just think there are certainly better receivers to pay up for this week. As I mean, you just mentioned Michael Thomas, $1 cheaper. I would definitely go that route, or Des Bryant in what looks like a shootout to me. I'd rather pay for those guys than pay up for A.J. Green. Yeah,
it does seem like they adjusted his price just a little bit down to 28 to make it a little bit more tempting because, like, in a vacuum, AJ Green is like the top 3 receiver, right? And of course, Brown's not playing this week either. So, matchup neutral, he'd probably be the top 2 or 3 receiver, and he's not. He's number 4 as far as the asking price. But I do agree. It's a really, really ambitious play at Jacksonville. It's so weird. Jacksonville's defense is just so legit. I just don't want to mess with them. Liz, are we avoiding AJ Green as well?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, and last week, I just think too, when he disappointed, I know I wasn't the only one who stacked him in Dalton last week. And so Andy Dalton, not Dalton Del Don, obviously, just a little clarification there. I think you have to downgrade him because also that offense, under Bill Lazor is still figuring itself out, right? And I think I was on the show the first week we opened talking about how evolution takes time and how some of the prices reflected, we want instant gratification, and that's not just what's going to happen right away.
And also game script doesn't set up great here because Jacksonville just wants to run the ball every single play and time of possession. And Cincinnati has just one of the most struggling offensive lines in the NFL. And
Right.
Jacksonville's on pace for an NFL record in sacks. So good luck, taking a 7-step drop and going deep to AJ Green with that setup.
You're saying Jacksonville's going to have like a 9-minute, 17-play drive that ends in like an 18-yard field goal.
Right, probably. Yeah, exactly.
Something like that. All right, Liz, what do you not want to pay up for today?
Well, I think Devonta Freeman is awfully expensive. If you take out Ezekiel Elliott, who's suspended, he's the 6th most expensive or 5th most expensive running back on the board. The first of the second tier of running backs, he's the most expensive, just ahead of Lamar Miller, who's I think $26. Right now, Freeman is $28. I also think, the Falcons' sputtering passing game, which is currently 13th in the league, despite the fact they closed out last year as the 3rd most prolific passing offense, like that passing game that's sputtering is negatively affecting the ground effort, obviously. And over the last 3 weeks, Freeman has yet to top 15 total touches. Tevin Coleman is in there as well. Freeman hasn't found the end zone since week 4. Now he's got this shoulder stinger, this combined neck issue, and the Panthers' run defense is allowing the 4th fewest fantasy points to opposing running backs in a YPC of 3.8. So while I do like Freeman in general, I do have him outside of my top 10 players at the position this week, which makes his price tag of 28 just out of reach.
Yeah, you mentioned Lamar Miller. He's $3 cheaper, and he's got a Q tag next to him. But as far as I know, I think he's going to play. We're recording this, of course, on a Thursday afternoon, but he's $3 cheaper than Freeman. And if they were the same price, I would take Lamar Miller over Freeman.
Right.
The matchup just seems so good. Of course, I guess you could play the ownership game, but just not a spot for me to pick. Dalton, are we fading Freeman as well?
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, clearly the shoulder injury has resulted in them limiting his touches. Just 33 carries over the past 3 weeks. And why not when you have such a capable alternative in Tevin Coleman? His 14 rushing attempts last week were his highest since his rookie season. So at that price, given the matchup, given he's banged up and the scaled back workload, totally agree with this one. I would avoid Devonta Freeman right now.
All right, so I'm kind of somewhat walking it back as far as my hard pass to some degree. I'm not exactly sure where I'm standing. Again, it's a Thursday. Plenty of time. I reserve the right to change my mind. But the Cowboys running back situation seems like an absolute mess. But they're all 10 bucks, right? Which makes it kind of interesting. Rod Smith, Darren McFadden, Alf Morris. Alf seems like the starter at this point, but who knows what that means. I think it's just, we'll talk about it in a second, but I think it's going to be a Dak game more than anything else. Probably in cash games, just because it's a tight cap on Yahoo, I probably will play Alf Morris, and regrettably so, but I don't think he's going to have a big game. But I think he's really, really fadeable in tournaments, and he's probably going to be super popular, depending on, again, how the news kind of rolls out the next couple of days. So let's talk about it, Dalton. The running back situation for Dallas, nobody really knows, right? We're all kind of sort of speculating. I guess Jones, the owner, talked about Morris being the guy, but he's starting. But what does that even mean if he starts off slow and the hot hand is Darren McFadden, who I assume he'll be active? We shall see. How are you handling the situation here?
Yeah, news broke right before we started recording this that Rod Smith is their number 2 running back and Darren McFadden more of a change of pace guy. But I agree, he definitely should be active for a rarity this season. Alfred Morris at $10, that is cheap. So he might be highly owned, as you said. The Chiefs have quietly given up the 3rd most yards per carry in the NFL, but it could be the quote unquote hot hand approach. Who knows once the bullets start flying? So it's definitely a tenuous situation in which we're just kind of taking a blind faith leap. But if you're going to use any of these guys, it's definitely Alfred Morris because he has been the guy who's been active on the game days. And of course, the owner coming out and saying he's the number 1 on the depth chart, but should be a fluid situation. So there's definitely some risk involved, albeit at a cheap price tag. What's
your take, Liz? I'm sure you're fielding a lot of questions as far as season-long players as well.
Yeah, well, for me, Alfred Morris has been the number 2 behind Elliott so far, but we also have to consider the fact that Darren McFadden was that guy previously, right, in 2015 behind the offensive line that was so staunch, that isn't as good this year, but it's still certainly above average. And we have to also think about the fact that he's an injury-prone player, so maybe, just maybe, he's being saved as an insurance policy for a moment like this, We know that Alfred Morris can't catch balls. We know that Darren McFadden has an Arkansas connection with Jerry Jones. I know you like narrative streets, so I had to throw it out there for you, Dean.
Appreciate it.
So I feel like that they're being sneaky here. Like I want all the signs point to Alfred Morris being the guy, which means to me DMC is going to be the guy.
Right.
Yeah, I just can't say anything with a lot of confidence. But Alf Morris, if you can project him to get like 15 touches or so at $10, sure. And cash games he can make other things work as well. But for tournaments, I think he's a really interesting fade because I can see that absolutely being a disaster. I can see it being a DAC game. I mean, McFadden, like you say, why not just save McFadden the entire season? Because they kind of sort of knew this was coming.
Right.
They kept, procrastinating and whatever, but they knew this was happening at some point. It's no big surprise. While we're at it, Dalton, sure, let's talk about the Dolphins situation, the disaster there. Damian Williams, Kenyon Drake. Do you like the Drake? Do you love the Drake? Do you hate the Drake? What's your thoughts as far as the Miami backfield?
Well, I have to say hate the Drake because the Seinfeld reference. But, yeah, I mean, you got to pick him up just because the running back situation is so desperate right now in season-long leagues. But Miami's the only team in the NFL without a carry inside the 5-yard line. Terrible offensive line, and it's going to be a committee, unfortunately, is what I expect. I would go with Drake first, the pedigree, his age, maybe more upside, but Damian Williams is going to be the third down guy, the guy catching the passes. So I just expect a timeshare that's ultimately frustrating for fantasy owners.
Yeah, same deal, Liz. It's kind of a leap of faith, right? I mean, I guess Drake seems like the sharper play right now, but who knows?
Well, I mean, my question is, this offensive line is the same offensive line that Jay Ajayi was running behind, right?
As far as I know.
He wasn't doing anything. I mean, I don't want to touch him, right? Like, I'm a huge Jay Ajayi truther. I love his skill set. Adam Gase has never been on the hype train. Remember the CJ Anderson offer sheet debacle from a year ago? So I don't know if Adam Gase is just like, I don't like him. I'm tired of putting him into my offense and it's not working out. But like, I don't see either of these guys being able to perform behind the protection, the run blocking unit that they're getting right now. So I don't want. I'm out.
I just like that, one of the reasons why they got rid of him supposedly is a bad locker room guy. And, like, Jay Cutler's right there.
Right. That's part of my thing. I was like, oh, dude, Adam Gase, you just got real emo and you sent the wrong Jay packing. That's what interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I just like that the Dolphins took on the don't care motto as a team. They're just embracing it all together. Let's fire off the hot take cannon. Dalton, what do you have for me?
Well, Aaron Jones, I have him ranked as my number 6 running back this week. Hopefully during the bye week, they made Nick Hundley passable, kind of made that game plan after seeing how bad he was throwing the ball downfield. But boy, he just passes the eye test. I get that Aaron Rodgers would produce more scoring opportunities, but at the flip side, Green Bay is they're going to make Aaron Jones the centerpiece of the offense. I mean, he's got 9 targets the last 2 weeks. That Saints defense is no total doormat like in the past, but even with terrible quarterback situation, he ripped them off for 131 rushing yards and a score. So I love Aaron Jones at home, prime time. I'm treating him as a clear-cut RB1, and I put him in my flex in my optimal DFS lineup this week.
You mentioned that you're a Giants fan, a San Francisco Giants fan, and you turned Brett into Nick Hundley.
Oh, that's right.
That's just how that worked. And he's a catcher. He probably has a pretty good arm, I would guess.
That's right. Good call. Yeah. I mean, Hundley's so forgettable. I was buying the hype that he was going to use his legs and be a viable DFS option the last time we saw him. So I think I put him out of my memory.
They played so scared. The play calling was so bad. Like they wouldn't let him throw the ball until I guess they were ahead was the problem. They were ahead in New Orleans by a little bit, and they just wouldn't let him throw it. And a game script's going to dictate it as far as Hundley if they let him actually go. But if they're ahead, I do agree. Like I think they're going to run the ball as much as possible. I think he's pretty interesting. What are your thoughts there, Liz?
Oh, I love Aaron Jones this week. I've never been a Ty Montgomery fan. Dude is averaging 2.0 yards per carry against a base front, which was fine before when Aaron Rodgers was under center because all he saw were light fronts. But that has changed. Also, Aaron Jones is just a better specimen. Like he may not be as good of an athlete as Ty Montgomery or as good of a football player, but he is a better pure running back. And that's what the Packers need right now. I referenced earlier Mike McCarthy's desire to just, irrationally lean on the run. And the Lions, the matchup for them are going to be without Haloti Ngata. So I think Aaron Jones I love him this week. I too have him in my optimal lineup.
It seems we have a very similar hot takes. I'm going to let you fire first, Liz.
Oh, okay. So My my hot take, it takes a couple of steps to get there. So we talked earlier, no Ezekiel Elliott. We're all, I think, in agreement that Dallas is going to throw the ball now, allow Dak to air it out a little bit. When Dak did that last year in the stead of Tony Romo, his favorite target was Cole Beasley. Now, some of that was because Dez was banged up, and so it took a little bit more time to build that rapport. But still, last year, Cole Beasley led the team in targets. He is out with a concussion. So that's problematic. Also, the Chiefs are giving up a ton of targets across the slot. But who would be next up? That person's name is Ryan Switzer, and he's a rookie out of North Carolina. Heading into the season, Scott Linehan said that he wanted Switzer to have a huge role. He had a huge man crush on him. He actually mentioned specifically him being depth behind Cole Beasley. If you're looking for a $10 baller, of which I have many, but this is going to be another one, I think Ryan Switzer is the hottest take possible on this board.
Well, my take is much more mild from a Dallas perspective. I agree Dak's going to be awesome, but I went like easy. I just said Dez is going to get to 100 yards, 2 touchdowns. Dak's going to get 300 yards and 3 touchdowns, potentially one on the ground as well. And I think it's going to be the Dez and Dak show. And but that's awesome. Like I saw that name, I'm like, wow. Okay, and then I started digging into him. Like, okay, this could be interesting. And nobody's going to play him if you want to be ambitious in tournaments.
Right, it's not a cash game play, right? Like, you're not going to mess with it. But I think in tournaments, like, if there's a dart throw, if Cole Beasley doesn't play, Ryan Switzer is going to see some action. And I liked his college tape. He impressed quite a bit, especially, like, heading into the Senior Bowl. So I think this could be a quiet, like, his arrival game. Now, if Cole Beasley plays, but Cole Beasley did see red zone targets last year, and people discount that. They sort of think that he was just this Lilliputian-esque chain mover, but he was actually much more than that. So I think that's my hottest of takes.
You referenced the $10 ballers, so let's fire him out. Dalton, you go first.
First of all, I agree with you guys in Dallas. I mean, that's just going to be a shootout. I have Dak Prescott everywhere. Even though Dez Bryant's gone 14 straight games without recording 100 yards, I don't think Marcus Peters is someone to shy away from. He's more of a name. He stays stationary on one side of the field. So I expect a total shootout, and I like all those guys. Obviously, without Zeke, they're going to throw it more. Kansas City's offense is so much better, so expect a big back-and-forth game there in a dome environment. The weather shouldn't affect it, as we saw so much rain last week. So totally on board with you guys there. I went with Alex Collins, who's remains cheap at just $13, close enough for the $10 baller. Has yet to receive a single goal line carry this year. Might be because he's lost a couple fumbles, but I mean, he's clearly the superior runner to Buck Allen. Not only does he have the most yards per carry in the NFL, he actually has the most rushes that's gone for 15 yards or more with 10 of them. So it's not just a lack of volume, a small sample when you look at the yards per carry. He's ripping off those long runs. Joe Flacco obviously isn't great, but he's an upgrade of Ryan Mallett, and it looks like he will play. So not the greatest matchup. Tennessee defends the run pretty well, but Alex Collins looks like a beast in the making. Seattle made a big mistake dropping him for Eddie Lacy. So he's going to, even Harbaugh came out and said Collins has earned a bigger role at $13. I like his value a lot this week.
Your thoughts on Collins, Liz, and then fire off your hot take.
Well, I agree. He's earned himself a larger role. I'm just a little bit worried about game flow. And Tennessee is not a pushover against the run. So for me, these two teams are really tough to project in terms of game script because their offenses have so many question marks. So I do like his price tag, though, and his ability. So, if you're looking for a cheap running back, I agree with Dalton that he's the best you're going to be able to find at that cost. My $10 baller, I have two. One starts at $13. It's Sammy Watkins. He's an elite talent, but he has been the invisible man in Los Angeles with my Rams. Heading into, in week 7, last week was week 8, it's all starting to blur. But in week 7, just in advance of the team's bye, he saw his second highest target total, 5 of the season, and his first red zone target since week 3. Sean McVay talked about getting him the ball more, there was some social media kerfuffle about Watkins wanting to be more involved. And then they're in bye, so I have to imagine they use this week off to find ways to feed him. And there's no Janoris Jenkins, no Jackrabbit on the other side of the ball, which certainly makes Watkins a more viable option at only $13. I gotta love that talent and situation. So I think he's a perfect wide receiver 3 in a lot of lineups. $10 baller, another tight end, and this one's actually $10. I don't think Delanie Walker is going to play on Sunday. He has this bone bruise in his ankle. He's currently day-to-day, so it's a pain management issue, but he was on crutches on Monday. Jonnu Smith, who has flashed, he scored in weeks 2 and 3 against Jacksonville and Seattle, respectively, is an interesting buy. That the team is high on him, and he and Mariota have some decent rapport, and I think he could sneak his way into the end zone. Listen, he's not going to catch like more than 3 balls, but I do think one of them ends up in the end zone. So he's a nice, if you're looking to save at the tight end position or just, a $10 flex, I think Smith could do it for you, assuming, of course, that Walker doesn't play.
I don't want to root injury against anybody. I don't want harm against anybody, but I'm with you. I will be very excited if Walker sits. Baltimore 32nd. There's 32 teams in the league. They're 32nd DVOA against tight ends, and just little I've seen of Jonnu Smith. He looks like an athlete. He's not a dad runner. He's got some.
He's not Jared Abbrederis.
He's got some legit skill to him. So and for $10, I'm looking for Dalton will bring you in because tight ends this week. There's a lot of options out there. I just don't know how I can make them work financially. With the salary cap, Ertz is certainly playable, but $30 is so expensive. Denver, that's the one way to get them, though, via the tight end. Kelsey is certainly in play. Jimmy Graham, I like a lot, but $22, not sure if I can get there. Where are you at as far as like your tight ends? Jack Doyle, I guess it's going to be kind of chalky after last week. It feels like a chase, but it's not really a chase because he's been getting targets the last 3 weeks or so, and they should be way behind. And garbage time points, those matter as well. So give me your overall assessment there as far as the tight end spot.
Yeah, real quick, circling back to Liz's picks, I agree with Sammy Watkins. Maybe they spent their bye week, finally figuring out how to implement him more into the offense. And Janoris Jenkins obviously out. I'm actually going to fly across the country Saturday to be at that game. I've never been to MetLife Stadium, so it looks like the possible rain, though. I don't know how that's going to be. Another real sleeper, cheaper guy in that for DFS. I like Orleans Darkwa against the Rams. Totally beatable run defense. As for tight ends, I went kind of a stars and scrubs approach with my optimal lineup, and I threw in just Austin Hooper for $10. I know he's kind of hit or miss if he's going to score. He scored last week and then dropped another one in the end zone. But yeah, Jack Doyle, man, the targets have just been out of control for him. And I know you're going to talk about an Indy guy, and that game script just sets up for, again, so many passes. I mean, Houston's going to put up a ton of points. Indy can't run the ball, so they're just going to be spending the whole second half. It might be ugly getting there, but Doyle's looking at a ton of targets again. But personally, right now, I've been kind of spending down at the position. Ryan Griffin at $12, another option. Ed Dixon is another option as well with no Kelvin Benjamin there. He's only $11 at home against Atlanta, so he's another cheap alternative.
Let's talk about that for a second. With Benjamin gone, does Funchess get heightened as well? I think McCaffrey might see like 13 targets. Like, what are your thoughts as far as the passing game there for Carolina?
I've moved Funchess up in my rankings. I get that he might see more coverage or whatever, and he already was seeing a decent amount of volume, but I expect his targets to get more in the 9, 10, 11 range. Should be Cam Newton's first read now, and it should especially benefit him in the red zone. So I do think that that trade definitely benefits Funchess' fantasy value.
What's your read there as far as Carolina, Liz?
I like Christian McCaffrey again. I mean, I know I got burned by him a little bit last week. He's $21 in our game this week, and you can use him all over the place. So I think he is going to see a lot more targets. He's not a running back. It'll be interesting to see if they implement Curtis Samuel at all, or how that shakes out, if there's some overlap in volume between CMC and Samuel, though I'm not rolling out Samuel anywhere. That's just something to keep an eye on, I guess, more for season long. But I think I agree with Dalton that Funchess does get a bump up, but I think in DFS, $21 for CMC with no Calvin Benjamin I'm going to play him. I just can't avoid that price tag.
Vernon Davis with Jordan Reed out. I was hoping he'd be like $10, maybe $11 or $12. He's like 15 they're asking for. We've seen whenever he's asked to step in, he's always been a guy that's done really well. The tricky part is they also lost Niles Paul. I think he had a concussion last week. So I don't know how this is going to work, if they're going to bring somebody off the practice squad and have them come in to block. Is Davis going to be asked to block more? Do you have a read on this, Liz?
Well, I think Davis is interesting because Jamison Crowder is also banged up. They finally found a way to get him involved and use him last week. So if he's banged up and not 100%, you have to imagine that Davis's volume is going to go up. And also, Dalton, you know this. What team did Davis play for forever? And what division is that team in? Like, if anyone has a read on the defense here, it's Vernon Davis. So I think, while I agree $15 isn't great, it's a more secure play than Ryan Griffin or Jonnu Smith.
Yeah, Washington has obviously problems at the X receiver position, big time. They're the number one receivers, Chris Thompson. and they can't run the ball. And Seattle is finally, as usual, second half of the season, their offense is clicking. So they're going to, Washington's going to be playing from behind. And a key here is Earl Thomas is out of this game.
Out. That's right.
Tight end position. So Vernon Davis is definitely an interesting play this week.
So you referenced Dalton, the cheapie I was talking about. There is a big opportunity cost, I think, the quarterbacks this week because, we haven't really talked about Deshaun Watson. We kind of mentioned about $42 is really hard to get to. But, he's just been smashing everybody in this matchup. It's just cake. And the hope, I guess, if you're not having him is basically he doesn't go for 4 quarters. they pump the brakes a little bit to some extent. Breeze, of course, I think he's going to be perfectly fine. Wilson at $37, very, very playable. And Prescott at $37, also very playable. But if you want to have a different lineup build in tournaments, and I think you could even do this in cash. Again, I'm not there just yet as far as my lineup building process. It's just Thursday. But Brissett should be involved in a bit of a shootout here against Houston. We saw last week Seattle absolutely destroyed that secondary. Of course, nobody's going to confuse Wilson for Brissett, but they're going to be behind. Like the game script suggests, the way all logic tells us that Indy will probably be down 10, two touchdowns, something like that. Not 10 touchdowns, 10 points or 2 touchdowns, somewhere possibly 10 touchdowns. But stay tuned, we shall see. But Brissett in some garbage time, and you can pair him with the guy with Doyle and. I know nobody wants to pair him with T.Y. Hilton the way T.Y. Hilton's been playing of late, but we know his big playability. We know he's better in domes. Is anybody interested in T.Y. Hilton in a tournament? Obviously in the cash game, it doesn't make a ton of sense, but Liz, bounce back for T.Y., is it going to happen or maybe not?
No, I'm not brave enough. No, I'm just kidding. I also think he's not. I'm looking up his price tag because he's $20. I don't know, man. I can't do it.
He's a better value around the industry. And Yahoo at $20, it's hard to do. But again, that's another reason why nobody's going to own him. And I guess you can play him in tournaments. You can pair him with Brissett.
Well, Dalton made a great point in his wrap-up column at the top of this week that the Texans have had trouble covering secondary receivers. Dalton, do you think that means what would that mean potentially for Hilton?
Yeah, that's a problem. They don't really have any. Moncrief has just been such a disaster. I don't know if there's anyone who could take advantage of that.
I know Kamar Aiken, catches 2 balls a game, if that.
Yeah. But this Houston secondary in general has been kind of banged up, and Brissett finally threw multiple touchdowns for the first time last week. And for all Cincinnati's faults, their secondary had been playing well. He rushes the ball. So I could see him as, if you want to, quote unquote, punt the position. I'm on board with Brissett. Having to play from behind should just result in volume. But yeah, T.Y. Hilton, it comes down to price, and as Dean alluded to, it's different across the industry here at DFS. But I do think there's a possibility of the narrative of squeaky wheel gets the grease with him because he has been complaining. He has massive home road splits this year, and obviously they're on the road this week. But I do think he's an interesting tournament play just because he's been such a disappointment as a big name. You figure his ownership is going to be the lowest maybe it's ever been.
Going to step aside and get out of here in just a second. Does anybody have any Thursday night takes? The Buffalo versus the Jets. Strap yourself in. This is going to be a doozy. Liz, I guess McCoy at $34 seems pretty reasonable.
Yeah, he's had 7 targets over his past 2 games, over 100 total yards in his last 3. He is the Bills' effort, at least until we see how much Calvin Benjamin is involved. I think Calvin Benjamin's got to be the big story of this game. He's $20. So, hey, would you rather have Calvin Benjamin at $20 or T.Y. Hilton at $20 in this one? I don't know. I think McCoy's a fine price tag. I think all 3 of us played him last week, but to me, Calvin Benjamin is the story here.
Dalton, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, if you're using this game, you have to use McCoy. He's simply by far the player to the best fantasy option in this game without question. Even though he's been better at home dating back to last year, they're starting to use him just like one of the biggest workhorses in the NFL. The crazy thing is Josh McCown has 10 total touchdowns the last 4 games. It's just been one of the bigger surprises, and he routinely cheap in DFS. Robbie Anderson has emerged as a clear number 1 receiver for the Jets, and I like him. I think he's kind of the real deal. So it's another sneaky option. ASJ, the touchdowns are there, but man, the yards per catch is like the worst in the NFL. So I don't know if his price tag is quite meeting his production on the field lately, but it's going to be another ugly slugfest, low-scoring Thursday night game, I fear.
I don't like Robbie Anderson this week, even though he scored in back-to-back weeks. And I get that his $16 price tag is interesting, but Tre'Davious White, who he's expected to see a lot of, is allowing under 4 catches and 44 yards per game. He's allowing a passer rating of just 79. So I think when you consider that Jeremy Curley is suspended for this game, ASJ will have a better chance of volume. And even at $19, I'd rather pay up for him than bother with Robbie Anderson. The Buffalo defense, even without EJ Gaines, is pretty stellar. So
4 straight games with at least 3 turnovers. I mean, that's pretty unheard of. I mean, Buffalo's D has just been the most takeaway force I've seen in a while. So roll with them as well.
I think it's going to be kind of ugly too. We shall see. And like McCoy seems like the most bankable guy in this game, and then the rest of it's basically some GPP.
So none of you are gonna gamble on Calvin Benjamin. None of us.
I don't think he's good, and and who knows like how quick did he even learn like the playbook? I understand like the depth chart receiver at Buffalo is just an absolute disaster. I just don't think Benjamin's very good. That's just kind of my issue with him.
Traded Tuesday and playing Thursday. That's an awful lot to ask. I expect limited snaps.
I don't know. The matchup is so beatable. He's got such an incredible catch radius. He's such a large red zone specimen. And Sean McDermott was the defensive coordinator in Carolina. The GM Bean was part of the front office when Calvin Benjamin was drafted. So there's some familiarity there. I'm really tempted. I mean, in redraft, I'm rolling him out, but even at 20, I'm really tempted if I were to include this game to go for it.
I do think it's an interesting. Well, I mean, as far as I don't know how many snaps he's going to roll out there. Again, this is probably out there that it'll crack before. This is Thursday afternoon, so that there's several hours before the game starts. And how much of the playbook does he know? Like, just run a button hook or something. I don't know.
We know he can run a go route, right?
Fair enough. He bailed us out. I had a lot of Benjamin last week. Maybe that's what I'm just bitter because he wasn't very good last week. But he was in a good spot and he got a bailout touchdown. Maybe he'll do that today. We shall see. With that, we're going to step aside and get out of here. Before we do that, Dalton, tell the people where they can find you on the interwebs.
Yeah, just go on Twitter. I post all my stuff there at Dalton Del Don, and I'll be insufferable for the next couple days bragging about the Astros win.
What was it? Oh, the Astros. I thought they were Oscars.
Insufferable. I post my Vegas ticket, and it'll only be a couple more days, I promise. Then I'll stop and I'll go back to pouring out poor fantasy football advice. Enjoy
it. Liz, where can the people find you?
You can follow me on Twitter at LizLoza_FF. You can check out my podcast, the X's and Y's podcast on iTunes. And then, of course, please tune in to Fantasy Football Live, the season-long version, if you will, of this show every Sunday morning, 90 minutes before kickoff.
$75,000 baller in the Yahoo lobby, $10 to enter, $10K if you bank it. That's good times. For Liz, for Dalton, I'm Dean. Thanks for watching. Enjoy week 9. We're out of here. Holler.